We'll wait for a couple of minutes as people will join in and attendees can join in.
They're joining in?
Yeah, people are joining in.
No,
so we'll just give a couple of minutes. Welcome to the Friday Forenoon with Entrepreneur series by Propel, the incubator at BML Munjal University. We hope all of you are safe. I'm Professor Davinder Singh from BML Munjal University, and I take great pleasure in welcoming everybody who is joining this webinar today. Technology has increased the reach to the markets. The physical boundaries between nations are no longer so strong, and the online platform allows many of the businesses to surpass these boundaries. This has led to what is known as cross-border entrepreneurship. Startups now have a wider reach to the users. They are no longer constrained within the geographical boundaries or the political boundaries. Having said this, while it is very attractive to look at cross-border entrepreneurship, it also comes with its fair set of challenges. Today in our webinar, we are going to discuss cross-border entrepreneurship, its advantages and challenges. And to discuss this, we are joined by three people who are based in three different locations across the world. Amongst the three of them, they would cover at least 3/4 of the time zones of the world. And it's our pleasure to bring them here welcome them to this webinar. I would like to introduce them one by one. First, I'd like to start with Ms. Ankita Day. She's based in Auckland, New Zealand. A business development and marketing expert, Ankita is a member of Board of Trustees of Women Entrepreneurship Center at Auckland. She's also a very active mentor and advisor for early stage startups. Thank you, Ankita, for coming and joining us. The time out, I think at your place would be around 6:30 in the evening.
Yeah, around 6, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to join you guys and share what's happening in New Zealand and how New Zealand ecosystem looks like.
We'd like to hear about that. Next, we're joined by Mr. Samir Gupta, who's based at Delhi. Samir has had a long career in corporate, but he's always been close to entrepreneurship, and he's currently a founder of Haldi Vita and India Glocal. He's a global growth evangelist and promoter of Indian food and art products. His organization, India Glocal, is working on cross-border entrepreneurship, and it has got various initiatives. Some of them will be covered in today's webinar. Welcome, Samir. You were the ones who started this Friday Forenoon series with Entrepreneur for us. So welcome once more onto the series. Next, we're joined by Mr. Nilendra Nath. Nilendra is from UK. He is the founder of an organization called Innovitas, which is an innovation, intelligence, and design company. He's on the board and as advisor to multiple startups in UK and across Europe. And he's one who's going to do a lot of discussion today and share with us the cross-border entrepreneurship initiative that he's been championing. Welcome, Nilendra, to this webinar.
Thanks, Devendra. Thanks a lot, and good morning, everyone.
So the way we will go is that we will have a presentation from them for about 30 to 40 minutes. Post that, we will open the session for question and answers. The question and answer tab as well as the chat tab is open. You can all keep putting in your chat on the Q&A your comments and questions, and we would be taking them up subsequently. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming here, and I will hand over the screen now to Nilendra.
Thanks, Devendra. Good morning, everyone. So what we'll do today is I'll try to keep my talk shorter. We will go through the fundamentals of what we call cross-border entrepreneurship, trade or exchange in general. And I'll try to keep my talk for about 20-25 minutes. And then we would try to get into a discussion with a Q&A. So that's way more relevant for everyone around. So let me straight jump into the slide deck and then take it forward from there. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, it's visible.
So, okay, just give me a second. There's something.
Would you need some help, Nilendra, on this?
So I don't know.
It's visible.
Is it showing there? Because
Yes, it's visible. It's visible.
Because it's not showing on my screen now.
Yeah, I think what you can do is you just go to the tab where your presentation is, and that's being seen by everybody. So you could use that tab and speak about it. Or if you want, you can email it to me and I can play it from my screen.
I can do that. Or is this visible? I think what's happening is somehow it's hanging and it's going on the play mode. So I'm not able to do the slideshow, but is the screen visible now?
Screen is visible.
Right. So let's just start with this.
Okay.
So the broader agenda for today will be to look at the fundamentals of cross-border. What does it exactly mean? Who does this cross-border trade? Who are the parties involved? What are the opportunities there? Why, as a set of student or young professional, it is way more relevant for us nowadays, and how do we go about doing it? I'll start with a small introduction, very short one with of India Global. Again, it's not moving. Let me send it across to you, Devendra. I think it's just give me 2 minutes. It's just hanging up. So I'll start with a small introduction of India Global, and then from there we'll move on to the topic. What we are trying to build at India Global is combining two sides of the cross-border trade. One is your facilitation, and another is the trade promotion work. Facilitation essentially means bringing together the bodies which actually help businesses engage with businesses in different geographical location and different political locations. And trade promotion body, essentially what they do is to promote these trade ecosystem to each other. As we'll go into the presentation, the function of these bodies become more clear. What we are trying to do at India Global is to build up a platform where we bring all these entities that you see in the picture, the businesses, Indian businesses, startups, the government regulatory bodies and trade bodies in India and elsewhere, and the broader global business ecosystem, which means that service providers, manufacturers, suppliers, buyers across the globe. So bringing them together is what India Global is trying to achieve here. So let's start with this, the fundamental of cross-borders. What do we really mean when we say that there is a cross-border transaction? Who are the parties who get involved in it? What kind of transaction that happens? And who does this? Who are the entities who do this? So essentially, across the board, everything that happens, there are two kinds of entities. One is what your government entities are, intra-government transaction, and what your private entities are. Private entities would include your publicly listed company, your privately held companies, all kind of societies, joint ventures, partnership, and individuals. So everything that is not a government is a private entity. And when you talk about cross-border trade, three things essentially crosses border. There are three C's of cross-border that are commodity, capacity, currency. Commodity is everything that is tradable, every physical object, every services, everything that you can sell and buy is sort of a commodity in the larger sense of the word. Capacity essentially we mean is by the people. So people themselves are also a part of this trade. People by both moving across the border, by sending their intellectual property across the border, using their skill to serve someone in different location. That forms the group of capacity. And third is currency, which essentially your any kind of currency to currency trade or any kind of investment in a different location. So these are the three things which basically moves across the border and which gets traded. How these transactions happen, again, the same thing. There are four ways this transaction can happen. Your import and export on products, technology transfer, which part of the capacity, and investments in different geography, and immigration, again, part of the currencies. Capacity. People moving, people going for higher education, people going to work in different location. So these are the transactions that is happening across the border. These could be government to government, like to government. We often hear that when a PM visits another country, they sign, say, $10 billion deal to do some sort of business in the country. Essentially, government to government transactions do not happen really on a government to government level. The understanding is built on government to government level, and the government in the both countries, or at least in the service delivery countries, bring in the businesses who will be fulfilling those requirements. Same way in the country which is the recipient of these transactions, governments bring in the businesses which will be buying from the another businesses in another government or other country. Most common form of these trade that happens is business to business, when you have one company in one country serving another company in another country through supplying goods for sales, through providing services. India is large on one of those. India provides a lot of IT services to businesses in different countries. So those are the business to business transaction. Business to people transaction is something which has become common in the last 1 decade or so. We see a lot of, for example, Amazon. Amazon sells across the world. They provide their and the logistics service which comes along with it. That's provided across the world to the sellers, to the vendors who are selling through Amazon. So those are the business models where you have business to business transaction and business to people transaction happening from the same place. Netflix is a business in some other location, but they are catering to the audience, consumers, buyers across the globe. So those are the business to people cross-border transaction that's been happening, and it's been increasingly growing in past 1 decade or so now. People to people is something which is very new. Your peer-to-peer has been tried a lot of time. If I'm not sure if any of you have heard of Napster, which started as a service early 2000, late 90s, early 2000. And something very common is torrent. Torrent is a people-to-people transaction which happens cross-border. A lot of transaction over blogs, a lot of video transactions, people streaming services where people create their own content and viewers from across the world probably pay for a private membership or to those prop contents or those video contents, uh, privileged access to YouTube channels. So those are the peer-to-peer transaction, which is increasingly growing now, which is not something which has happened in the past. So there are new ways of cross-border transaction that has been happening, that's been building up, and that's why it has been becoming so more important nowadays than before. So why does it happen at all? Why do people go and trade across borders? A very natural question. You are sitting in a country where you have around 1.35 billion people. 700 to 800 people are the active consumers. They are buying some commodity or another. They are availing all kind of services. From any business perspective, if you would think of this as a single closed market and you would be building a business here, it's a very understandable, a very logical approach to just to focus on this one country because this consumer base is already very big. So why do countries in a different part of the world actually try to promote cross-border or send people or their businesses or their services to a geography which can be a lot of a much more riskier business proposition? A single word answer is uneven distribution. You do not have things distributed evenly across the world geography. And from there all kind of cross-border interaction starts. It's not only entrepreneurship or trade, even your geopolitics, your diplomacy, everything starts from the root cause of uneven distribution across the globe. Your uneven distribution is across essentially four categories we can put it in. One is your resources, natural resources, very understandable thing that they're not equally distributed across the globe and every country has something which other need and every country has or does not have something. Most common example is oil. Crude oil is something which everyone needs, but it's available in few geographies. This kind of uneven distribution would be called a geographical uneven distribution or a spatial uneven distribution. Technology and capability is something which is more of a temporal uneven distribution. Over a period of time, based on what they had naturally available, based the way their economy grow, every country has developed different kind of technology and different kind of capabilities. So some places have a very high-end technological capability, but also means that they have labor or people or skilled force which are also very expensive because probably the population is less or probably most of them have trained on things which are not what you would call as a mid-class or low-class skilled labor capacity. Whereas another country may be low on high-end technology, but very high on mid or lower class of skilled labor. So those kind of distribution also contribute and cause a reason for people to ask or look for a cross-border relation, a business relation or diplomatic relation. And then the most important thing is need. The first example of oil. Oil is needed everywhere, but it's not available everywhere. Similarly, as and when we get more exposed to what people are buying, eating, how they are behaving in different geographies, our need and our want is start increasing, and we will also want to have the similar kind of thing that's being used in other countries. And with those increasing need, there is an increasing want. A requirement comes of those services which are being delivered in different locations to be transferred to those countries also. And that becomes a primary generator of demand of new services or a foreign services in a newer geography or different country. So these are broadly the four reasons why people go about doing the cross-border trade. What it looks like, why this is something which is growing now, why cross-border entrepreneurship is such a big thing now, and what are the challenges associated with that. So look at this market numbers. This is how, so the numbers itself are not important. The point is that the size of the economy, size of the GDP of different places. And you see that there are a lot of smaller, comparatively much smaller countries which have much smaller GDP. This is a PPP basis. So this signifies more as the proportion of the population as well. So the different size or the different size of economies actually shows two things. One, as a country, if you're a smaller economy or even if a bigger economy, uh, as a smaller economy, you are not producing a lot of things that might be required or wanted by the people, the consumer in your country. So you have a need to bring those things into the country. As a bigger economy, you have opportunity to create things and invest far more money in building things which can be wanted or are required by the people in another country, and so you can export them and sell them across the geography. A bigger economy also gives you a stronger flex muscles to with the different countries and try to push your businesses in different territories. The point of this is that with the unequal distribution of the economic size or GDP across the globe, there is what you would call in the terms of physics probably say there is a difference of uh, a kind of a potential between two geographies, and that creates a market environment where things can be sold or bought from different locations. This has been happening forever. Trade is cross-country trade has a long history back to second millennium BC. People have been trading across geographies forever, but never at this scale, and never those people who have owned very small businesses or people who are just starting off. Why that scenario has changed, and that scenario has changed quite recently in last 15, 20 years. First, because in last half a century, we have seen big difference in technology. And when I say big difference, it's really big. When you already had, say, mobile telephony in United States of America, you probably had no way of communication in African continent. So as the differences of technology or the services or the commodity increases between geographies, the demand or the need to bring them from one location to another location increases. Last half century saw a lot of that happening, and that triggered a requirement or a need for cross-border movement. But what that did was the only thing that was viable to move cross-border were the big entities or the government-owned entities who could go and trade, who could take the cost of, have the negotiations, have the capability to set up in another country and go and do that. With internet, a lot of that changed. It became much easier for businesses to broadcast their services, their proposition to countries across the globe. You did not need to go to a country to tell them that you have something that you want to sell to them. You just needed to put a website. The cost of doing that came down very significantly, very fast. It's now it's almost in every individual's budget to essentially go and put out a website and say this is what I'm selling, and I'm able to sell across the world. Uh, Travel and logistic cost got extremely reduced and became very accessible to everyone. The marine transport in even say 10 or 15 or 20 years ago would be a nightmare for even a significant size of business, but now something that any individual can start and get onto. uh, Social media triggered a lot of people's understanding of what's happening in different countries, and with more access and more awareness about different culture, different people, they also wanted to start using different things that those people were using. Uh, a very good example is K-pop. South Korean pop or South Korean cosmetics became a rage across the world, and people wanted to consume more of that. So these kind of changes that happened over this period of time actually led to a lot of new businesses popping up, because it's easier to pop a business up now and reach out to global audience, to set up and look directly at international market. So while in a very early stage the idea was that you would build a business, grow your business domestically, then you become a very large company, and then you try to look at the international market. That too, very few limited market. Probably the countries your country have already had ties with earlier, or your country is already doing business with, have a well researched, well portrayed understanding of the market. Those are the countries you go and buy businesses and do that. Those were the legacies method. Now the modern method is that you identify the country you want to serve. Doesn't matter where you are sitting. You identify if you can source the commodity or services which you want to sell to them, and then you can sit in a third country which has nothing to do with your supplier and your buyer, and set up the business. So those kind of change propelled what we call cross-border entrepreneurship. Everyone wanted to get on that bandwagon. And essentially, again, it started from the Northern America. A lot of Northern American business popped up, and they looked at supplier or manufacturer in China, essentially, for the longest period of time, China alone. And then they looked at audience which was spread across what you would call the Western sphere of influence, your European countries, Australia, New Zealand, to some extent Japan as well. So those were the geographies they started selling, building business in Northern America, and buying or having manufacturing in countries like China. Eventually they moved to Vietnam or Thailand, Bangladesh, a lot of that in India in last half a decade or a decade or so. So that's where the opportunity lies. You have easier travel, easier logistic, more understanding of people across the globe, and a huge diasporic population of pretty much every country living across. For India, it's even more significant now because you have a lot of Indians living across the world. India is the biggest diasporic population across the world. So for Indians, you don't really have to go cross border and cater only an international audience. Even if you're doing something which is very domestic, which is very associated with India, you could still be doing a cross border trade because you have such a large population of Indians living outside India. And you would see some very niche of that happening, like Hyderabad restaurant sends Halim across the globe, and that's a significant size business. You have Tirupati temple sending prasad across the globe. That is also a significant size trade in itself. So that also became a criteria for countries to look into different geography and identify if you have your own people big enough population size living in that country to whom your business can serve. And what is significant about that is these kind of things like your Halim or even a lot of small cottage businesses in food or clothing. A lot of lungi get exported from India to Middle East because you have a larger South Indian diaspora living there. A lot of achar gets exported from India to across the world, from Gujarat to US, because you have a diaspora. And these are all MSMEs, small cottage industry businesses which are doing it. So those are the opportunities builder which are in place. But then there are very major challenges as well when you talk about cross-border trade or entrepreneurship. And biggest one is the regulatory restrictions. There are myriads of regulatory restrictions across different government. The bigger the government, they try to flex more muscles. The smaller government have the lesser ones. But with the smaller government, if you go to a country which is very nascent in the global trade space, their challenge is that their regulatory restrictions are not well defined. So there are a lot of loopholes and a scope for corruption. Your authorities there can play around with the rules. So regulatory restriction forms one of the biggest challenges when we look at doing cross-border trade. As a small business, or say a startup sitting somewhere in India, in Vizag or in Trivandrum, you are not probably sitting in one of the capital city in the cells where you can meet these countries' representative or embassies. Your access to these locations is purely based on internet, and you are doing all your businesses through that. And then if you are trying to get into 5 countries, then you have to fulfill some 50, 60 regulations of each of them. It becomes a huge challenge for a first time or small businesses. So that's the legal challenge that's there. Then you have geopolitical climate, which we are seeing nowadays quite frequently. something which is completely unrelated to your business or your ability to run that business or the regulation around that business can completely impact and stop your business, which is the relation between the governments. If two governments stop talking to each other, or they find that they are hostile to each other and they are not willing to cooperate anymore, a lot of it trickles down to the businesses which were happening between those countries, whether import or export. TikTok is an example right now. All the 15 apps is an example right now. There are two factors here also. One is your geopolitical climate directly, when a country becomes hostile, can snap off all the trade relation. Second is thing that if your country or another country is hostile with your country, a problem that arises is that you start scrutinizing them more. So you start putting more stronger regulatory restrictions on them. And that can also start affecting your small businesses and startups a lot. So that's a huge challenge out there. And these are the things which are outside the control of business itself. Then a third, or something which is more inherent, but it's still in the control of the business, is cultural and social understanding. Despite of the world getting more connected and people having better understanding through social media and exchanges across internet, there is still much to be understood about different geographies and the people living there, how their daily lives work. And those becomes your, what you would call a tactical barrier in building businesses across globe. Because your communication of the product that you are selling, the way you advertise them, the language that you use, the customer relation, the UI, the UX of your interfaces, how it works, all those fall in that your bucket of understanding them culturally and socially. Good thing is that's something that businesses can learn. This is not like geopolitical or regulatory. It's not something outside the control of the businesses. This is within the control of the businesses. And but it's still one of the biggest challenge because we are working across languages and across cultures. And a lot of businesses who are trying to get into these places are the MSMEs and very domestic companies. So for them to learn, this is a curve. This is a long curve which takes a lot of time to do it. Also, businesses at that point of time when they're trying to go cross-border generally are having much baggage of their own way of doing things. So that transition also becomes a huge barrier. Though on the onset, it doesn't seem like something which would be restrictive to your business growth. I'm going off the time, so I'll just move fast. So earlier when I was showing India Global slide, I talked about two things, trade facilitation and trade promotion. So I just want to make a note on these three things. So when you see regulatory restriction, geopolitical climate, and cultural and social understanding, just try to put these things in the perspective with those two topics. Trade facilitation is something which helps you build a business. So any issues with your cultural, social understanding, or even very tactical things in a business like logistics, marketing, business development, all those kind of support system that comes from the trade facilitation bodies, your corporate legal kind of activities, all those comes from trade facilitation bodies. Trade promotion bodies actually try and mitigate the risk for you. So they would go out and they would put out country or the broader sector or broader domain product, like your things like for India, it will be your Export Promotion Council or something like that. Engineering Product Export Promotion Council. So those, what they do is that they promote the category and they also work as policy influencers, both to your government and to other governments, to help them come out with the regulatory practices which will be easier for the sector or for companies. Between these two, there will be organizations which will be doing both. There will be organizations which will be entirely just suggesting policies. There can be think tanks which will just be producing out reports and results that how industries are doing, how sectors are doing, and putting that out across to the government in different geographies, saying that what should they be doing to attract more or improve the business transaction. So that all those bodies together along with the business create your business ecosystem. So this slide full of logo talks about the different tiers of the business ecosystem. there's a lot more to them, but I'm just trying to break them down in 4 essential categories. Your super category, someone who sits on the top of everything, are the governments and the intra-government bodies. So with Indian context, Indian government and its ministries sit on the topmost layer, where they decide on the policies or even the requirement to trade with or not to trade with the countries. The influencer body where they go and talk to these people are intra-government bodies, like your World Trade Organization is the global one, SARC is the regional one, BRICS is essentially built on common need and common requirements of the developing countries. BIMSTEC is your neighborhood growth kind of body, a regional organizations. ICC is International Chamber of Commerce. So those are the bodies where they negotiate, they talk to each other, they decide what kind of things, what kind of trade they would allow from each other's geographies. And then there are countries, they go on what you call bilateral trade ties, direct export, direct import from those geographies. So that's the top layer where all the decisions are being made about the game of the cross-border trade, that what will happen, what will not happen. Then you have the second layer of what I call facilitators and then regulators. Regulators essentially are your government agencies, which ensures that the rule that the government have made are being followed when the businesses are happening. Holds true for both domestic and cross-border. But for cross-border, you'll have specific provisions which are not applying to domestic. But the structure remains the same. You will have local facilitators, domestic facilitators, you will have international facilitators. CIA and FICCI has been 2 of the flagship facilitation body. Then you have something which government creates as a program to attract investment or to increase the what you call attractiveness of the geography as, say, startup friendly or manufacturing friendly country or the location. Then you come to a third layer, and that's where your flagship and marquee organizations sit. These are the legacy companies. These are the big brands which are there. They can be your, and when I say brands, they don't really have to be companies. They have to be anything that promotes the business environment in the country or the capability of the country. So your universities, which are known across the globe, your research organizations known across the globe, your brands, and then even the softer power, Bollywood, cricket, all those kind of things. These are the confidence builders in the country or in the business environment, which people from different geographies look at and think that, yes, this is a place where I can go and invest or I can sell my things. There are people who are willing to buy or have the capacity or money power to buy things. What these kind of organizations do is that they do an advertisement for you. They make you look attractive to people. And on the back of that attractiveness, your new gen of the businesses or new gen of cross-border interaction grows, where you see a lot of new businesses coming in. Now for the next slide, just keep these 2 layers in the mind. There's a very prominent difference that you see when you see at these 2 layers. Your flagship and marquee organization in case of India are all legacies. They are something which is before 1990s or at max have improved and grown in 1990. And when you see the emerging participants, the new age things, they are largely this decade. 2010. So last decade is when they have grown up. So there is a 20-year gap in between where nothing really grown outside India as such. And that's the reason why it is more relevant now than before. Why that did not happen for that 20 years? Two reasons. In 1990s, India opened up for as a business in India, and a lot of growth happened. A lot of services became available to Indians. The domestic market was big enough. Companies were not big enough before that to actually take on Indian and international market at one go. They were more focused on growing their businesses and selling things in India. Big enough market, big enough place to serve and cater to the population. They did that. Legacy systems were difficult to move across also. Legacy businesses did not have the agility or ease of crossing over. The cost of crossing over was also way more than what it is now. So while you have had the biggest of the businesses easily transition and become international business or multinational brands. The smaller ones who were building in 90s couldn't really do that, or those who were building in early 2000 couldn't do that. We saw that transition happening with late 2000 and early 2010s when what you call a purely internet business model came in. And in last 10 years or so, that has really blown up. You have huge number, and I say 36 million MSME business in India. That's a very conservative figure, counting only registered and identified businesses. In reality, the number is much larger. Practically every fourth or fifth household in India is a small business or a micro-sized business. Indian startup ecosystem has grown in last decade. India has become third largest economy, and India is slated to become the largest consumer open market outside China. So China is not considered an open market. Outside China, India, the youth population of India is growing very fast, and very fast we are moving towards a billion consumer. And that's what's looked at around 2030. So it means there are two things happening together. You have a big bunch of small businesses which have good digital presence. There is internet penetration. A lot of people own mobile. A lot of people, we have the second largest internet population in the world. So people who can access international market can go international, have the ability to go that in terms of infrastructure available. India growing as the largest consumer market means that there is a huge interest in international businesses coming to India. So it's a very thriving environment for all kind of cross-border trade across the board. The large companies, the small companies, the new pop-up startup, the space is open for everyone right now. And there is, for all practical purpose, there's nothing like starting a domestic business anymore or joining a domestic business. As a student, every business that you're going to join or every work that you are doing has a cross-border presence. They are already working in multiple geographies or are almost ready to do that, which means you need to have an understanding of consumer base in different countries, their preferences, their brand understanding, how they communicate, what their life choices are. So today, it's way more relevant than ever before for anyone who is in any sphere of work, essentially. Even you're from government to non-government, from a large organization to small organization. There's nothing like a purely domestic space where people are operating. Everything is essentially now cross-border. And so that's my introduction to the cross-border environment that I have. I've already shot over the time, so I'll just quickly introduce what India Global is doing in that context to bring students on board with the understanding of international trade. Is that we have a 12-month program. It's a completely free program, which is going to enroll 70 students in a virtual and physical mix kind of program, where we are focusing on 4 things. Having a curated learning program for the student to understand the global business environment, attach them with mentors, both domestic and international, to develop their own niche of domain and geography, get connected with the businesses across, and develop leadership acumens to be able to work in these growing global environment. So, I don't know, Professor Davinder, should we go ahead or should I just cut it short?
Yeah, I mean, you can cover the rest of the slides.
So I have 2 slides. Ankita will take the New Zealand one. I'll just give a quick introduction to the UK ecosystem.
Sure. I think let's do that. Then we will start the open the question, and then we can go a little beyond 12 as well. That's okay.
All right. So I'll just give you a quick introduction to the UK startup ecosystem. How's that and how thriving it is that. UK historically has been a trade center for a very long time, and given the geography, and you see the size, like on the map, it's an island country. So UK itself did not have a lot of resources which they grow. They did have manufacturing, which happened in earlier industrial ages, but eventually those also moved out. And right now what UK have, and for a very long time, is known as the financial center of the world, the financial hub, financial capital. So even the startup ecosystem has grown on that base. So UK startup ecosystem is largely known for fintech. There's a huge activity happening in the fintech space, in your cryptocurrency space, and insurance, and all the ancillary services which goes around. But on the base of a strong fintech ecosystem, the tech ecosystem has also grown significantly there. Two essentially goes hand in hand, because to have a very strong fintech support system to work in a country, you actually need services which are already on the technology platform and using them. So in the European Union, UK is generally labeled as the tech capital or tech growth capital of the place. And you can see the numbers around, so I'm not going to reiterate them. So they have actually built a lot of unicorn tech companies that's come out of UK and grown in Europe, Israel, and this part of the world. Outside US, UK has the largest tech base or tech growth stage startups, the highest tech investment that's happening. And while this was a growth story from 2005 onwards, since 2014-15, the government have very actively looked at building UK as the startup capital of the world, and which has led to them putting out a lot of programs, a lot of initiatives, easy investment programs, going together to build these ecosystem. What is more relevant for someone who is from India is that are two things actually. One, they have two visa regime for the innovators and the investors to come and start working in UK startup system. So they, for last 2 or 3 years, they've been trying really hard to find talent, to find innovators across the globe who would want to build their startup in UK, or the startups who are already doing business come to UK and set UK as their international hub or international headquarters. From Indian student perspective, if you're transitioning from India to UK for studies or even to set up the company, one way is to actually go for a higher education there and incubate your businesses startup in the university. And the other way is two visa schemes. One is innovator visa scheme and another is your investor visa scheme, where you put a product out and you have a list of incubation programs or validators in UK who would look through your solution and may validate it if it's something which is viable, and that extends a visa to you as an innovator coming to the country. I can actually share that list of validators later on through mail or something. So that's what's happening there, and that's how somebody who is not in UK can kind of build something or capitalize on the opportunities available there. Three things which are taking really up right now. So London is essentially a hub for all kind of fintech. You have Manchester, Greater Manchester region, where a lot of creative space or media tech is happening. Then you have a lot of health tech happening between the two cities. And off late, you have growth of smart city projects happening in UK. So those are the 4 areas where you can look at. I'll move to next slide and I'll let Ankita explain the ecosystem in New Zealand.
Thanks, Neil. Okay. So it's been almost 2 years now. I've been connected with New Zealand startup ecosystem, and Founders Lab. The target audience for the Founders Lab is early stage startup founders. So one of the things that is very important for me is to stay connected with the startup ecosystem over here and stay updated with what's happening in the market. So far in last 2 years, we have organized over 50 workshops and meetups and have had so many partner events and workshops. So one thing I realized, and this is something that I have heard from other startup founders as well, is New Zealand is a very beautiful and a very friendly place to do a business. It's very easy to set up and start a business over here. In just 24 hours, you can just register your business and start over. Nowadays, and we have been increasingly targeting overseas markets now and nailing unique global niches. So that is one of the requirements for us, given that we are such a small country with just 5 million people. global audience is our target audience from day one. So that is how we have to function and target, because otherwise domestic market would just get saturated in a year or two. So we have been increasingly targeting overseas. We have had a good number of partnerships with Indian companies also. Two primary examples could be, so there is a company called Fonterra over here, which is like Amul in India. So if Fonterra has a joint venture with the Future Group in India, and that's how a good quality milk and meat products are distributed in India from are exported from New Zealand to India. And then Dr. Reddy's in India, they are knowledge partner of one of the premier institutes, universities in Auckland, which is University of Auckland. So where we have all other research on drugs. And so this kind of partnerships we have been having, and we have been becoming more and more outward focusing. So most of the startups, SMEs, and established companies over here, you'll find immigrants everywhere, because this is, as in this country constitutes mostly immigrants, as in you would find very less number of locals or Maoris or Kiwis over here. Also, the kind of community we are in, it's a very closely knit community. So once you go to the meetups and events, if you go to 4 or 5 meetups from 6 to 7 meetup onwards, you'll find familiar faces, and which makes it very easy to connect with them and have collaborations very easily. So that's the kind of high level environment or the ecosystem or the community that we have. Coming to the industries, or what kind of industries are emerging now. So New Zealand government is trying to harness the potential of artificial intelligence and deep learning technology. Government is investing a lot on this kind of, on startups and SMEs who are into this industries. So it's very much tech focused, and also something which is very common and which is getting a lot of interest is edge computing, and it might have a massive adoption in the coming years. And also the next generation technologies like connected cars, smart drones. So this kind of industries are getting a lot of interest. So given that we are a small country, it's very easy to, get government access and connect with the government. And government has been trying its best to help the startups, either by funding or providing business capability support. So when I say business capability support, it starts with if you need business mentoring, or if you need to make financial plan, if you want to make a business canvas or business plan, you can just connect with the relevant government officials and you can get that support for free. And also, if you want to do some research and development work, government funds you. So whatever expenditure you make on research and development, you get 10% back from the government. If renting a property, which is very expensive here and especially expensive for the startups. So if you want any support on the financial part, government supports you on that. Taxes are very high over here, but government supports you with tax credits if you are a startup. And one special thing that is great for Indians and for anyone coming from overseas is that we also have a visa called Entrepreneurship Visa, which makes it easier for the startups and for the founders and entrepreneurs to come to New Zealand and set up a business. So it usually gives you 12 months of time. The country gives you 12 months of time to set up your business. And if you could set up your business, you get 2 more years to establish your business and scale it over here. So which is very good. The environment over here is very supportive. People are very warm and welcoming. And yes, so it's a very friendly and very laid back kind of environment, while people are, it's a very safe, and a very beautiful country, and a very supportive ecosystem, a very supportive startup ecosystem, I would say. So yeah, that's a very high level overview of New Zealand startup ecosystem.
Great, thanks Ankita. So yes, that's all that we have now. And I apologize for rushing through this slide. I realized midway that it was taking a lot of time. So thanks for listening in. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. I'll just stop sharing now.
So here, if I can just add one thing here.
Samir, please go
Given
ahead.
that.
Yes, please, Samir,
Samir,
please
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah. See, I would like to tell the students one thing. I mean, we are very seamlessly connected, and integrated between various geographies. We have got New Zealand in the east, we have got in the west UK, and plus we have got, bits and pieces of our relationships, either in Dubai or Canada, in the US also. So it's very much, it's like a global connect. We are all connected internationally. And so if there is a company or if there is a startup which has got the potential, that is very important. I mean, not just for the heck of just wanting to go overseas and establishing yours, but if you've got a potential, then yes, it can be considered. We can help you. And this program, what Neil just discussed, we are going to do a run of this entire thing. Some students are going to get selected, and depending on the merit of the student and the program in which they would like, or the startup which they are planning to start with. So we'll do the selection, and you guys can join in, and you can apply for it. That program is going to run, which through Munjal University, Professor Davinder will send it across to you guys.
Thank you, Samir. Yeah, that's a very important part. A lot of students are there with us on the webinar, and it would be of immense interest to them to consider these details which are being about the program of Young Leader program. Thank you so much, Nilendra, Ankita, and Samir for sharing your thoughts about cross-border entrepreneurship. There are some questions in the chat box, and also I've got some, of myself. Very quickly, I mean, cross-border trade or cross-border entrepreneurship, one would assume a physical movement of people also is an important part, especially of the entrepreneur. Now, with the COVID situation, how do you see that thing going through a change? Do you see the cross-border entrepreneurship going up or down? Or what are the factors which will help, and which are the factors which will deter the cross-border entrepreneurship?
So, I'll start and then probably others will pitch it. My understanding is that there's no stopping now. So what you're talking about, COVID or post-COVID, is more of a tactical issue which is happening here, whether people themselves move or not. If at all, what it's going to bring is it is going to reduce the requirement of people to physically move out. I'll take an example of Estonia. So Estonia, I think almost 5-6 years ago, started with the e-residency for business, only for the business purposes. So that could be a model which can move ahead, because why countries essentially wanted people to move for a startup. So when I said that UK want to hunt talent across the globe and bring them to UK, it's essentially to house the innovation that is happening and put a label of UK having that innovation, or UK have added value to that innovation, and having businesses there and transaction happening through UK. In a post-COVID world, yes, people would be wary of completely moving ways or trying to go and settle in one geography. So what you're going to see more happening is having a distributed team or distributed business structure across different locations to hedge onto the geographical risk. So in that environment, I think what's going to happen more is more companies are going to come up with the programs where your physical location will become irrelevant and your business will independently be located in anywhere, in any geography in the world, without the whole of the team or the part of the team actually being there and represented there. And we have seen smaller countries which cannot really attract people in terms of the infra available within the country doing this already. You had this more happening in financial sector earlier. Now that's happening a lot in tech space. Samir and Ankit wants to add to that.
Samir, would you want to add on to what Nilendra just said? Okay, so there's also this one question, there is this geopolitical thing happening, some countries are not happy with other countries. Also, there is things like banning apps, etc. So how do you see this geopolitical thing playing out, and how much of it would impact cross-border trade?
So that's a concern, and like I said during the slide, that it's something which is beyond control of the individual companies, right? Individual entities, or in some terms, even your trade promotion group or the lobby groups. That has been there. I mean, geopolitical tensions have been there, and they do affect. There is nothing which can be overruled. That it's only two things. When we talk about startup, if you are not really a TikTok or share it or something that big, or coming from a location which is China or equivalently controversial or hostile, this is not a real threat to a wider base. It's a very specific threat for something very specific kind of solution, like something which is collecting a lot of data, something which is a financial, probably managing financial transaction, or coming from very specific geography. So for the small businesses, I wouldn't be so much worried if you're doing something, especially if you're into commodity trading, selling product or selling services. For large businesses or very large businesses, sometimes they themselves become the reason for these kind of hostility when they're trying to merge or buy out businesses in different geographies. But that's a very different ball game altogether, where they are the part of geopolitics themselves. Your big oil companies, your big manufacturing companies. For a small business or for a startup perspective, I don't think on or it's a threat you should be worried about too much. It's an odd event. It doesn't happen on a regular basis.
Okay. Samir, from your experience, you've been not just in India, but in Middle East as well. How do you see the Indian startup, which sectors of Indian startups having a strong demand or a good opportunity abroad?
See, it totally depends on the kind of a startup. Whole lot of startups, they approach me. Some of the startups, they are very localized. I mean, they are addressing a problem which is, for the local region or for a particular country. So those startups, they can be replicated to a very small extent overseas, but they are not actually the ones who can be taken overseas. Now if we categorize the startups, they will be in two categories. One will be the product category. The second is going to be the service category. And product category also, we have to be very specific. What are the products are we talking about? What is the competition? Now I come across whole lot of startups who says like, okay, we would like to start, we would like to start selling our product without doing any market assessment, any market research, trying to find out what is the competition, what is the pricing of your product, are you competing with China, are you competing with other African countries, would you be cheaper, what is the quality of your product, and what is the need for that product. So once all this assessment is done, and you find like you have got a potential, I'll give you a very small example, like rose water. Now this rose water, the one which is getting produced in Kannauj, has got a huge potential to take it overseas because of three reasons. One is the pricing. Second is the Indian quality of rose is totally different. It's more fragrant. And third, we have got a complete ecosystem in India which can export this rose water in very large quantities, which other countries, they don't have as of date. This is fine. But if a person says, I would like to say very fine cloth, I would like to export, or maybe some kind of a linen. Now here in this case, you have to compete with Korea, you have to compete with Far East, like what I used to see in Oman. I mean, there are a whole lot of these countries who can provide a much better quality in a much cheaper price. So that's one part. The second comes your services. If your services have got a potential and you can provide them either on the quality or on the pricing or on the utility, then fine, it can be taken overseas. So that evaluation has to be done.
Right. Thanks, Samir, for that input. What you're really saying is that don't just jump, assuming that there is a lot of potential. Study the market before you go there and understand not just the local market, but your competition. I think that makes sense. And that is relevant, I think, whether it is domestic market or abroad. Ankita, you mentioned that New Zealand has 5 million people, and it actually looks at the world as its market rather than. So, but there would be some startups in India who might want to look at New Zealand. So, do you think it makes sense for them to look towards New Zealand as a possible market to tap into? And if yes, what kind of product would it be? You mentioned about AI. Would technology startups have a good opportunity in Australia, in New Zealand and Australia as well? Because the two of you are pretty close to each other.
Yeah. So yes, though the focus is mostly on tech startups and deep tech, but we have a lot of Indian startups and a lot of collaborations and joint ventures with Indian startups already in Auckland, especially, and a lot of focus is on the cultural products or the traditional products, like something that is very specific to Indian culture, and those are, as in we have a huge scope over there, and I know a few companies over here which have collaboration with Indian companies, especially artisans and craftsmen, and as in those companies they are doing really well on that part. And the second area of collaboration, or the second industry which is booming and where Indian companies are getting a lot of collaboration and joint venture opportunities with New Zealand companies, is biotech industry, which is growing. Yeah, it's growing exponentially. It's getting a lot of government support in terms of funding, in terms of other resources, even in terms of employees. If you need employees, but if you can't afford their salaries, government is ready to pay the salaries. But they are looking for the right kind of entrepreneurs or the right kind of startups who can help companies in New Zealand grow their companies and develop and have better collaboration with other parts of the world.
Okay, great. There is a question which says from Tarun. He wants to understand how is the funding ecosystem for startups in New Zealand and UK. Maybe I think we can go first with Ankita and then come to Nilendra for the UK ecosystem.
Well, for funding ecosystem, I would say that with years, we have been gaining a lot of international interest, and we have been getting a lot of investment from companies overseas or funding overseas, and also a lot of domestic investments have also been taking place. It's mostly in the angel investment part. So decades back, the investment sector was not one of the attractive sectors because we had most of the investments and funding in the property area. But now, given that government is focusing a lot on startups and SMEs, so a lot of angel investment opportunities are here. And if not, as in if private fundings are not that suitable, or if people find it very competitive, governments fund a lot of startups when they are at initial phase, so that they can get to a stage where they can scale up easily. So funding market is huge, especially from the government side. Government spends a lot on startups over here.
Nilendra, about UK, could you briefly talk about the ecosystem?
UK investment ecosystem is thriving. There is a lot of money in the system. There is no question about that. You have a lot of private money. You have a lot of government grants. You have a lot of scheme tax rebate for people who are investing in startups. Then UK has a lot of top class universities. Those universities get a lot of research and incubation grant. So you have a lot of channels for money to flow into startups. But at the same time, UK has a lot of startups as well. So while there are many avenues and a lot of money coming in, you would see on the slide also I put that the tech space alone have in last year raised somewhere around 6 billion, and that's a small space there, like the digital tech, and that has raised 6 billion last year. So there's a lot of money in the system. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of employment support, similar to New Zealand. That is there. There is what they call as apprentice program, in which government pays for the interns that the companies are hiring. So all those things are in the place. But at the same time, there's so many startups that the competition is still of the top notch. It's cutthroat out there because too many people are teaming for those benefits.
Right. I think with the competition itself is high as well, along with these.
But avenues are many for investment. So if you are even half decent, you have a venues where you can go to, and then there is debt funding, which is so to say is kind of practically unlimited. There are low rate taxes available to everyone who wants to start a business.
Great, thanks. Any final bits from you in terms of if you were to give one big advice to the startups who are trying to look at foreign markets, startups in India looking for more? What are the key advice that each one of you would give them?
So I have just two. One thing is work on your strength. A lot of startup I see working who are chasing the trends, who look at the what's working in the market, and if say right now because TikTok got banned and video content is something which is trending, you had 10 apps coming out. So don't chase the trend, because following the trend, you're not going to be the unicorn. You're going to be a unicorn by setting the trend. So identify what kind of skills you have, what interest you have, and what are your ideas which you want to build upon, and do that. Don't do what someone else is doing. To put that in context of having an international access is that, especially in the tech space, now you don't have to really look at a geographical region as a market. So it doesn't even matter if your audience, like 5,000 people, is spread in 100 countries. It doesn't matter if you're targeting that niche, because that also makes a 5 million audience for you in 100 countries, and your way to reach them is exactly the same. So if you're in that space, don't worry about how niche you are. Do something which somebody is not actually actively done already. Improve upon the process, improve upon the technology, improve upon how things can be used by people, how different they are. But just don't fall for following a trend. If something is done in some other country, if a product is made in US, don't make a replica of that in your country.
Ankita, from your side, a piece of advice.
I would say two things that I have learned from my experiences. The only effort that you have to make to initiate the process is to start talking to people, start interacting with people, start networking with people. And I'm sure people out there would be very willing to help you and collaborate with you. So that's the only effort you need to make to start to get into entrepreneurship. And the second thing, like Neil said, don't go with the trend. Just look at what interests you, and if you find wherever you find the right market, just understand, explore that market, and get with that. Because if you just go with the trend, but you don't have much interest in that, you lose out on your interest, or you lose out. As in, it's going to be for decades, right? So it's not going to be for just a month or two, or for just a year or two. So it really needs to be something you're passionate about and you love to do. So just don't go with the trend, but go with what you want to do and what you like to do.
Great.
And with New Zealand market, given that we are a very small country and we have very creative and lovely people over here, and people always welcome new startups, entrepreneurs, and they are very willing to collaborate and have ventures. But I would really recommend, if you want to expand to New Zealand, have a good understanding of the market, have a good understanding of the culture. And if you want to have that understanding, there are a lot of avenues through which you can do that. So I would suggest that first do that. And if you find this market as a suitable thing for your product or service, then go for it.
Great, thanks.
I'll just underline that point. What she said first is ask.
Yeah.
You have no idea how many problems get solved just by simply going out and asking for it. So whatever you're doing, if you are stuck somewhere, go about asking anyone you find. You'll find a lot of help out there.
True. I think that's a very unique thing in the startup ecosystem. People are willing to help each other out.
Yeah.
It's not so much in a corporate world, but in startup world, I've noticed this thing. Samir ji, anything? Your advice?
Very much the same. I mean, I would also like to just add to what Ankita and Neil are saying. I mean, some of the guys, I mean, don't go to these countries or don't go overseas just because you're fascinated by it. I mean, that's one thing. I mean, just for the heck of going. I mean, if you have got a product which has got a potential, or you are thinking of doing something creative, then like fine, creative or which has got a potential there, then it's fine. But a lot of people, they come only because they want to go to New Zealand, or they want to go to UK, or they want to go to a particular country. Things don't happen that way. This is not a route to immigrate to migrate to some other country. It's a business.
I think that's an important part. Right. Go with the business and not to go to settle there. Right. And thank you so much. I really appreciate the time that the three of you have taken out, and to the attendees to be on this webinar. We covered a lot. I think a lot is still needs to be discussed. We would request attendees, if you would like to connect to any of the three participants here, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to connect you to them. And thank you so much, Nilendra. Thank you so much, Ankita and Mr. Samir, for being here today and being with the aspiring entrepreneurs, encouraging them to look beyond India and look at cross-border entrepreneurship. Thank you. All of us, please let's take care and let's practice all the safety precautions. Let's remain safe. Thank you so much.
You too, everyone. Take care. Bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.